Happy Transfiguration Sunday, everyone, and also happy Valentine's Day. This morning, I'm going to be sharing from the book of 2 Kings, chapter 2. This is the story where Elijah is taken up into heaven and Elisha receives the mantle, the passing of the power of God from Elisha to Elisha. And I want to dig into that story and kind of some of the things that I think it means for us and how it fits into the whole narrative of 2 Kings and of Scripture. So we'll begin by reading chapter 2, verses 1 through part of 15. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Place is important in this section, so Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. This is another repetitive pattern in this narrative, is I will not leave you. And so they went. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" He's kind of peeved about this reminder. "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." Jericho, another place. And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of prophets, sound familiar? The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." The Jordan, another place. And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. The Jordan, familiar. Take note. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You've asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, "My father, my father! The chariots and the horsemen of Israel!" Can't believe what he's seen. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and he tore it in two. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan, the moment of testing. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and he struck the water with it. "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. The company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, "The spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha." And we'll end our reading there. So there's repetition in this passage that we need to pay attention to. There's place that we need to pay attention to. And I think these two things together lead us to one really important point that I want to talk about this morning. And there are just a plethora of important points in this passage, but we're going to focus on one. And so the first thing I want to note here is the repetition of, stay here from Elijah. The Lord has called me, you stay here. And Elijah's response, which is, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." If you remember back when, Elijah had been through an incredible time of testing, and he basically asked God to just kill him, to take his life. We talked about this a couple months ago. And after the whole encounter with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel and Jezebel hunting him for his life, and Elijah is just like distressed and distraught, and he's exhausted and he feels alone. And when God ministers to Elijah and kind of comes to him and feeds him and nurtures him and brings his spirit to him, his presence to him on Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai, it's also known as, the same place where Moses went and received the law, in the face of actually a lot of turmoil in the people of Israel. They just come out of Exodus, and there they are. He's up on the mountain. He comes down. They're all sinning. They're all worshiping idols. So he breaks the tablets, and then he goes back up, and God gives him the law a second time. Right? It's in the middle of this kind of a narrative. Moses went to Sinai. Similarly, when the people are embroiled in all kinds of idolatry, they need to kind of have a reset. Elijah ends up going to Mount Horeb, and God meets with him face to face. And there in the silence, God tells Elijah what to do next in order really for God to work through Elijah to take the people of Israel to this next step, this next place of restoration, of healing, of righteousness. And part of that is that Elijah then goes and taps Elisha on the shoulder, puts his cloak on him, and calls him kind of into the prophethood, into being his successor in a sense. And Elisha follows Elijah and begins to walk along with him and kind of learn the way of the prophet from Elijah. And so here, as Elijah and Elisha are journeying, they're walking along together. They're doing the work of the Lord. And I think Elisha is kind of apprenticing Elijah. And Elijah knows all the other prophets, the prophets of Bethel, the prophets of Jericho, Elisha himself, everybody knows that this is the day. This is the day that Elijah is going to go. And I think that at each step along the way, Elijah is giving Elisha an out. Do you really want to do this? Is this really the life you want? Because as the story in 1 King tells us, Elijah hasn't had an easy time of it. The other prophets, were being hunted for their lives. It wasn't an easy time. And so at each point, he's giving Elisha the opportunity. You can say no to this. You can stop right here. Just go on and live your life. But Elisha continues to hear the call of God in his life and to affirm it with his actions, to take the next step in the journey, to take the next step in the journey, to take the next step in the journey. We're going to hold on to that point for a minute because I want to talk about the places. I've already kind of mentioned how if we're looking back at 1 Kings, and Elisha's mentor was at Horeb, and it was kind of like a parallel in a sense to what Moses was doing on the Mount Sinai. Well, when we come down to this narrative in the Elijah-Elisha journey towards Elijah kind of going up into heaven, we get a lot of similar places that were significant in the story for Joshua, for instance. And so the places don't come in the same sequence exactly, but when we think about where Elijah and Elisha begin, they're already in Gilgal. Now, what is Gilgal exactly? In Joshua 4 and 5, we see the narrative where Moses has kind of, the mantle has been passed from Moses to Joshua, and Joshua is going to lead the people into the promised land. But first they have to go from Shittim into, across the Jordan River that was at flood levels, and then, into the promised land. Well, it was Gilgal where they first camped after crossing the Jordan River. And so we have here Gilgal, what they do is after they cross the Jordan in Joshua 4 and 5, they pick up stones, each tribe, big stones, and they place them in Gilgal as memory stones, so that whenever the children asked, why are these stones here? They were supposed to say, this is a reminder that God's hand is powerful, that we are to fear him because we crossed the Jordan on dry land just as we had crossed the Red Sea. And so it was a reminder in many ways. Gilgal itself, what happened there, it was a reminder that God keeps his promises, that he, the people had been given promises. Abraham had been given a promise, and after him, the other patriarchs and matriarchs had been given a promise of what God was going to do through them to bless the world and to give them descendants and to give them the land. That was the covenant. And so we see that, the time spent in Egypt, though, and the time spent wandering in the desert was a real time of testing. Is the covenant going to happen? Is God going to come through? And when they crossed the Jordan on dry ground, mimicking the crossing of the Red Sea, the Exodus, the moment where God really rescues the people from slavery, and they cross into Gilgal and they put up those stones, it is a reminder to the people that God is fulfilling his covenant. It's a covenant renewal in the time of testing. Now we have this next place, doesn't actually show up necessarily in the Joshua narratives, but it's the place of Bethel. So Elijah and Elisha go from Gilgal to Bethel. And Bethel is the place where we see Jacob wrestling with God in Genesis 28 after he has, messed with his brother Esau, and he's running for his life, and he's like he's leaving the promised land, and he's like on his way out. And God comes to him in a dream and says, this land will be yours, where you are laying your head. Your descendants will be many, and people will be blessed through you. And there he sees kind of, a scene of God's kind of promise, opening up heaven to him and showing him that he is going to keep the covenant promise through Jacob that had been promised through Abraham, particularly in Genesis 12. And this is also during a time of testing. So covenant renewal in the time of testing. Then we end up back with Elijah and Elisha. They go to Jericho. So they've gone to Gilgal, then to Bethel, and then to Jericho. And we all know, many of us know the story of, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. Here, Joshua leads the people in this miraculous God-given victory over Jericho. It's the first encounter with actually taking possession of the land. And I think that's a similar thing. It's the first victory, the first step, the first beachhead towards inhabiting the covenant promise. So again, a covenant fulfillment in the time of testing. And then finally, in the Elijah-Elisha sequence, they go from Gilgal to Bethel to Jericho. And from Jericho, they actually cross the Jordan River into the land that is like kind of the opposite way. So when the Israelites came into the land to conquer it, they went from Shittim into Jericho. Now they're going from Jericho across the river in a different direction, as if they're leaving the promised land. And that's where, Elijah is taken up to heaven. He receives kind of the mantle from Elisha. The power of God comes on him. But I really think about this as, Elijah here, he's the prophet going forward. He parts the waters, just as Moses had parted the Red Sea. And then Elisha asks for this double blessing to receive the power of God to do the work of God in ways even greater than Elijah has done. And Elijah's like, I can't promise it. That alone is going to come from God's hand. See what happens. And then it kind of comes to this testing point where Elijah now he's gone over the Red Sea. Elijah leads the way. And now, he's gone over the Jordan. Elijah leads the way. And now Elisha has to test the power of God to see if he can get back across the Jordan. And he does exactly what, Elijah has done. He puts Elijah's cloak to the water, and the water parts. And just as Joshua before, just as Elijah before, he crossed over on dry ground. And I really think that this is kind of like a narrative of a new step in the long story of God working out his covenant. And again, it's in a time of testing. The people at this time are working, they're struggling through unfaithfulness, through idolatry. As we read the rest of 2 Kings, the narrative of exile is looming because the two kingdoms are so faithless. But at this moment, I think, the repetition of Moses, who, Moses and Elijah kind of being similarly paired here, and Elisha being similarly paired to Joshua, and then this mention in the middle of it all of Bethel, which reminds us of what happened with the narrative of Jacob. All together, it just says, God is faithful. God is faithful. God is faithful to his covenant. He will not leave us. He will not renege on his promises. The journey is long. I mean, we're talking hundreds of, thousands of years that have passed from the time of Abraham. And here we have the baton being passed, from Elijah to Elisha, just as it had been passed from Moses to Joshua before, just as even previously, it had been passed from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and on and on. And I think this narrative reminds us, it's what it was speaking to me today, is that though the journey is long, though it takes its twists and turns, and sometimes you end up, in Egypt and you have to cross the Red Sea, and though sometimes you're, wandering in the desert and you come and you cross the Jordan, and then you're crossing back over the Jordan, and then there's fights to be had, and there's, testing times, all the craziness that is life. It may seem like God's promises are not sure. It may seem that the way has been lost. But if we continue to take the next step, to take the next step, to take the next step, as surely as you live, I will not leave you. As surely as God lives, I will not leave him. I will not leave the way that God has given me. If we walk in the way, God will walk in his ways with us. That is actually the heart of the covenant. Covenant faithfulness, it goes both ways. We have a requirement, we have requirements. We need to follow the covenant. We need to be faithful, and God will be faithful to us. And in fact, we learn from the Bible that even when we are not faithful to the covenant, he continues to be faithful to his covenant with us. It is his great mercy. And so this morning, I was reminded of a song that I learned when I was worshiping with Mennonites, and got it out of one of their songbooks, Sing the Journey, and it's called Come Walk With Me. It's a South African song, Hamba nathi, and the words are very simple. Come walk with us, the journey is long. It's like a collective singing. The congregation sings to the rest of the congregation, come on everyone, let's walk together, let's do this together because the journey is long. Moses needed to walk together with Joshua, and Elijah needed to walk together with Elisha, and we all need to walk together with one another because the journey is long, the work is big, but God's faithfulness remains through it all. Come walk with us, the journey is long. And then the next line, share our burden and join in the song. So yeah, there is a burden, there is a heaviness at times, as the Elijah narrative reminds us. But join in the song, because this is the song of life, the song of faithfulness and renewal and overcoming in the times of testing. God is faithful. Let's share this burden, walk together, and join in the song of life. Come. And this is where the song turns from, flat across the congregation upward to heaven, speaking to God. Come, uplift us and bring us new life. God, we are weary. Elijah crying out to God at Horeb, like, I'm weary, oh God, I can't do it, I want to die. And God's like, okay, let me bring you relief. Go tap Elisha on the shoulder. He will take over from you. And then God takes Elijah up into the heavens, in the whirlwind, receiving his reward. So come, uplift us, Lord. While we are here, there is burden, there is heaviness. We need you, Jesus. We need you, Lord. Bring us new life. This is our prayer. And then the final line of the song, give us peace when the journey is done. Here we see the picture of Elijah being given his peace because he had walked the long journey and received his reward. And Elisha too received his award, as Moses had, as Joshua had, as Abraham had, as all, all the faithful forefathers and foremothers had. We have a long history, a long narrative, a long peoplehood that, God has engrafted us into, has born us into the covenant. God says, in Genesis, he speaks to Abraham, I will give you the land and many descendants, and your descendants will be blessed by the nations, and the nations will be blessed will be blessed by your descendants. And that's our story. That is the journey that we live on, is to bless, and to be blessed as we walk along together, sharing one another's burdens, sharing the burden of the gospel, but also sharing the joy of the gospel, that God's kingdom and God's blessing and God's new life comes from it all. So may we sing together and remind one another today that though the journey may be long, it is a journey of life, a journey of song. It is a journey we walk together, that we are not alone in it, and that it is a journey of faithfulness, that God over time is working it all out for good. And when we are in the dark moments where we don't always see where things are going, God is still working out his purposes in those times of testing. Remember that today, and be blessed, friends. Take care. Hamba.